April 5, 2015, began like any other day in the bustling halls of Texas Health Presbyterian Hospital, until a patient emerged from the operating room with a spine that no surgeon could repair, a mangled wrist, and a future forever altered by the hands of Dr. Christopher Duntsch, a man who would later be dubbed Dr. Death. His story is a chilling reminder that even the most trusted healers can become instruments of harm. Christopher Duntsch arrived in Dallas in 2009, a charismatic graduate of the University of Texas Medical School and a neurosurgery resident at Baylor College of Medicine. He was praised for his confidence, his crisp white coat, and his promise to fix what's broken. The hospitals that hired him, Baylor, Texas Health Presbyterian, and later, a private practice in Dallas, saw in him a bright, ambitious surgeon who could attract patients and prestige. Yet behind the polished resume lay a pattern of reckless behavior that would soon spiral into a series of catastrophic surgeries. Between 2010 and 2014, Duntsch performed a string of spinal fusions, laminectomies, and nerve root procedures that left at least 11 patients either permanently disabled or dead. One of the first warning signs appeared in the case of Michael Shaughnessy, a 31-year-old construction worker who arrived with severe back pain. After a routine appearing lumbar fusion, Shaughnessy awoke with his spine twisted at an impossible angle, his lower body paralyzed. Surgeons later discovered that the hardware had been placed so incorrectly that the vertebrae were effectively fused in a grotesque, U-shaped configuration that no human anatomy could sustain. The patient's life was irrevocably altered, and the incident should have sounded an alarm, but the alarms fell on deaf ears. Hospital administrators, concerned about legal liabilities, quietly reassigned Duntsch rather than confront the growing evidence of malpractice. Colleagues who tried to voice concerns were met with hostility. One attending physician recalled being called a liability for questioning his technique. Duntsch's own confidence grew, his arrogance inflating into a dangerous belief that he could not be wrong. He began operating without proper imaging, often relying on his own intuition rather than the standard of care. In a chilling 2012 case, he performed a cervical spine surgery on a 21-year-old woman with a herniated disc, and instead of stabilizing her neck, he severed the spinal cord, leaving her a quadriplegic. The surgeon who observed the procedure later described the scene as a nightmare unfolding in real time. The turning point came when the Texas Medical Board placed Duntsch on a 2-year probationary license in 2012, citing substandard surgical technique. Even then, he was allowed to continue operating, a decision later criticized as a catastrophic failure of oversight. By the time the Texas Department of Insurance sued the hospitals for malpractice, the number of victims had risen to 8 with permanent injuries, and 3 deaths directly linked to his interventions. The trial that would finally bring Duntsch to justice began in July 2017, in a courtroom that seemed unusually solemn for a case of medical malpractice. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence: surgical logs, video recordings, testimonies from disgraced colleagues, and, most damningly, a series of autopsies that painted a picture of systematic negligence bordering on intentional harm. The defense, led by a high-profile attorney, argued that surgical complications are an inherent risk in spine surgery, and that the outcomes were unfortunate but not criminal. Key testimony came from Dr. James M. Jim Chiles, a fellow neurosurgeon who had observed Duntsch's operative style for years. He described a surgeon who bypassed basic protocols, cut through bone without imaging, and left instruments inside patients. He recounted an instance where Duntsch allegedly placed a screw into the spinal canal, then, when questioned, simply tightened it further, ignoring the bleeding that followed. Another pivotal witness was a former nurse who revealed that Duntsch had threatened staff who raised concerns, saying, "If you don't trust me, you're the problem." The courtroom atmosphere grew tense as the prosecutor read the autopsy reports. Bone fragments lodged in the spinal cord, shattered vertebrae where none should have been, and in one case, a piece of a surgical instrument found embedded in a patient's thigh months after the operation. The forensic pathologist's testimony was chillingly precise. He explained that the autopsy of a 28-year-old patient who had undergone a routine lumbar fusion showed that the pedicle screws had been placed at a 45-degree angle, an orientation that inevitably breached the spinal canal. The resulting nerve damage caused the patient to lose use of both legs within weeks, a fact that could not be dismissed as a surgical accident. The pathologist also highlighted a pattern of malpositioned hardware that appeared consistently across multiple cases, suggesting a reckless disregard for standard surgical anatomy. After a week of testimonies, the jury deliberated for just 3 days. Their verdict was unequivocal. Christopher Duntsch was found guilty of aggravated assault, a crime typically reserved for violent felonies, not medical errors. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a rare and unprecedented outcome for a physician. In his closing statement, the prosecutor warned, when a doctor's oath is twisted into a weapon, the justice system must respond with the same severity as any other weapon of harm. The aftermath of the trial sent shockwaves through the medical community. Hospitals across the United States revisited their credentialing processes, implementing stricter peer review mechanisms and mandatory reporting of surgical complications. Subscribe to the Autopsy Files for more stories like this.